Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking, here to tell you the importance of first impressions, straight from the master of failing them. Because this week, I'm looking at World's End Club, released by Too Kyo Games and published by Izanagi Games in 2020 for iOS and in 2021 for the Nintendo Switch and Windows. World's End Club is Too Kyo Games' second ever game, though I have never heard anyone mention the first, so does it really count? What's worth noting is that the studio is composed almost entirely of former Spike Chunsoft employees, including Kotaro Uchikoshi, the director of the Zero Escape series I covered last summer. The company was founded on the idea of creating new IPs and indie games, with their first foray into the world of anime games being this mess. A side-scrolling visual novel platformer originally released exclusively for Apple Arcade, the game was praised for its story and characters, yet criticized on pretty much everything else unrelated to those two things. The game would then release on an actual console 9 months later. Did they have time to fix its biggest issues, or did this game's world end before it even got a chance? In order to find out, let's give it everything we've got! The game cold opens on 4 kids in the least kid-friendly environment since Freddy Fazbear's Mega Pizzaplex as they attempt to defeat something named Mike, and they make their way forward as we're introduced to the awful side-scrolling action that defines this game. This is the first big problem. The gameplay itself feels unfinished. We'll see more of this later, but its jumping feels floaty, there's an awkward delay in button inputs, and the characters themselves feel too clunky. Eventually you get used to it, but it doesn't feel good. They clunk their way into a futuristic building and meet up with this game's 8 other main characters, but they aren't properly introduced quite yet, so my throat gets to live for a bit longer. They are confronted by a strange purple being that reminds me of the Overlord from Lego Ninjago, who says they've already lost because they're unawakened, and then they all die. Well, the Go-Getters Club had a good run. See you next week, everybody!
See? I told you. My word is the absolute law! What a weird show.
So we just went from like 2095 to 1995. Oh, cool, just wanted to make sure. You did read the title of this game, right? This moment should come as a surprise. They all awaken in World's End Land, an underwater theme park, because the last time someone tried to build an establishment under the sea, it went so well! Regardless, this is when the player is formally introduced to every member of the Go-Getters Club, so let's get it started! The classic silent protagonist type who really loves to dress in the Minions color scheme, save for a really poorly placed pink patch that makes him resemble a baboon in only the worst way, Reycho! The more shy and reserved cat girl of the two. Wait, wrong one. The ditzy and unaware prodigy whose scatterbrained comments often go ignored by a majority of the club, Vanilla! The hot-headed ruler wannabe who always resorts to slugging it out in a one-sided rivalry with Reycho and the unfortunate receiver of one of the worst characters' affections, Kansai! Said tied for worst member of the Go-Getters Club whose fiery attitude and aggression are desperate cover for her short stature and rat-like face, Chuko! The other tied for worst member of the Go-Getters Club with a holier-than-thou outlook on life and a religious admiration for a team of fictional superheroes, Tatsun! The member who really pushes the limit of what a 12-year-old looks like since she looks ready to run a company or speak to the manager depending on which life path she goes down, Genu! The gentle coward of the club who, of course, is obsessed with food and finds himself drawn toward the aroma of any food like he was a fucking Looney Tune, Mochan! The soft, motherly figure in the Go-Getters Club who looks 2 steps away from being a Pokemon protagonist and is said to have skin like a marshmallow, and I honestly can't tell if it's a good thing or not, Pie! Vanilla's older brother, even though they're in the same grade and both 12 years old, which I still don't believe, with a dark past that forged him into the cold and heartless person he is today, Aniki! The fashion-forward, logically sound tech genius daughter of a scientist whose hair looks like chocolate vanilla swirl ice cream with hot fudge on top, and now I want to stop and get ice cream, but much like her, I will never give up, Nyoro! And the other member of the club with silent protagonist energy who is always busy #gaming and spends the majority of the game as the most forgettable character, Pochi! That may be all of the go-getters, but there's still another face in the scene who doesn't want to be outshone. Penelope. That being from the movie they were watching, who is now hosting the same game with these kids. And yes, they are all 12, and no, almost none of them look like it. Basically, their bracelet has a task for another member of the club, and the first person to complete their task wins while everyone else is left behind to die. For example, Reycho's bracelet says Vanilla's task is to eat a marshmallow. Would eating pie count? Regardless, this is by far the best part of the game as everyone handles the situation differently. People like Aniki, Genu, and Nyoro result to any dirty tactic necessary, Reycho, Vanilla, and Pochi try to stop anybody from winning, and the rest just kind of panic. It's almost like this creative team has experience with stories about a group of people in a confined space distrusting one another in an attempt to escape their location. However, it's all immediately undermined. Why? Because none of it matters! There's a great moment where Kansai gets eliminated, thus eliminating Genu since a part of her task was to steal Kansai's hat, and now she can't, which eliminates Pai because her task was to keep Genu in the game until the timer was at 9 minutes, which eliminates Pochi because his task was to go on a ride with Pai, thus leaving Aniki, Reycho, and Vanilla as the final 3.
Like I thought. The only one left is you, Reycho.
Okay, rude. Reycho eliminates Aniki to win the game. Vanilla doesn't count because World's End Club saw Final Fantasy VII's definition of subtlety and was like, how about instead of being as subtle as a brick to the face, we be as subtle as a brick wall to the face? Master X key in hand. See why I did this in Zenki 0 back to back? Reycho uses it to open up the sludge bot that supposedly killed everyone to see that they are completely fine. And since the X key is one use only and everyone's still trapped down there, Penelope announces round 2.
That was easier than I thought it would be.
Pai cheating like that has summoned Death from Final Destination, who plans on crushing her with a diving helmet as she's about to reveal the mastermind's identity. Aniki saves her, but the impact cracked all the walls, so they're about to drown. Reycho activates his Ex Machina protagonist powers and awakens to the Big League Pitcher ability, throwing the massive helmet at a submarine to knock it down and allow them to escape to the surface. And seeing how the surface looks, I guess you could call it an escape.
This is the comedy police. The joke's too funny.
I'm not going back to jail!
I know it may seem like I dropped the whole none of this matters thing, but I didn't. That whole opening is nothing like the rest of the game going forward. It would be like if the prologue to Ace Attorney was a fighting game before switching over to Courtroom Mystery. Yeah, it would be fun, but fucking stupid and pointless. They reveal much later that the mastermind behind the Game of Fate thought they were being brainwashed and that the effects would be undone when put in a life-threatening situation. But they weren't being brainwashed, so the whole opening really was pointless. Anyway, while Reycho, Pochi, Vanilla, and Pai are concerned with the giant X in the sky, the rest of the club are concerned with the fact that they're in Kagoshima when, last they knew, they were headed to Kamakura from Tokyo, which, in layman's terms, is far as fuck away from Kagoshima. The club decides to split up and search the city, and Reycho gets stuck with the ditzy girl, the shy gamer, and the fat kid. A team marked for success in the apocalypse, no doubt. This is the introduction to the puzzling side of this puzzle platformer, as Reycho's skill allows him to throw objects at certain parts of the environment or move objects in order to progress. It's more fun than the platforming itself, but it's nothing special. Mochan disappears because his ass wanted a mango, and the other 3 get cornered by Chaos from Sonic the Hedgehog in dog form, prompting Mochan to overcome his fears of literally anything that isn't food and awaken to his skill, Iron Chef, where he just curls into a ball and turns to metal. Yeah, that'll stop the massive blue beast that could just completely ignore him. It actually does work because game, and everyone reunites. Reycho then convinces the team to go on the 1,000+ kilometer trek to Tokyo, and the game gets into action. We've got a road trip, baby! Their trip will be split into 3 sections: Act, Camp, and Story. Act is the 2D puzzle platformer sections, Camp is a brief break in the action to talk to the characters, and Story is just story progression. Kansai suggests Reycho is the mastermind before proclaiming himself the leader of the Go-Getters Club thanks to his stupid badge. We also get confirmation that Reycho, Pai, Pochi, and Vanilla are the only ones who can see the giant X. The next day, the club is split on where to go, with Vanilla, Pai, Genu, Aniki, and Mochan wanting to go to Oita, the shorter route, while Kansai, Chuko, Tatsu, Nyoro, and Pochi wanting to go to Fukuoka, which has a higher chance of having other people in it. Well, Pochi just wants to go because Nyoro flirted with him, and if the Game of Fate wasn't proof enough that this club club is just the worst group of friends ever, they end up splitting up instead of settling on one location. This is the introduction to the branching timeline aspect of this game, which also doesn't mean much in the grand scheme of things, but we'll get more on that later. For now, Reycho gets to choose which path to go down, and for the sake of this video, we're off to Fukuoka, which takes 10 days. Now, if this were a true mobile game, it would take 10 real days to get there, and cost at least $1.99 to speed it up. Anyway, this place is a ghost town, so they take another week to go to Yamaguchi. I hope you're ready to learn the name of basically every important Japanese city, because this game is basically one big travel guide. It's here when a sheepish girl named Yuki descends from the heavens amongst the snow like a princess. I guess it's fitting that her skin is Snow White.
Man, that guy is so unfunny.
You shouldn't have said that. Now you are going to perish.
Kansai immediately loves her, which means Chuko immediately hates her, and she gets left behind with Pochi, who gives her a bag of spicy chips he just carried with him for 17 days. Just in time for her to catch up to Reycho and company and save them with her new awakened power, Fiery Maiden.
It's a little spicy right now. It's getting hotter.
Imagine you and your friends all get superpowers, and yours is being able to vomit fireballs only after you eat really hot chips. Pochi was captured by a Yeti during all this, so Chuko uses her newfound power to save him, and then Yuki in two of the worst boss fights ever. It's just waiting and tossing a barrel 3 times. What fun. With a new team member and another awakening, they set out to reunite with the other half in Ehime, where they encounter another person, who definitely looks trustworthy and not cult member-like. They find that the rest of the Go-Getters Club are already there, and they are introduced to the Master, a totally not cult leader, who tells them that they are still alive thanks to their god, Mike, which you have no reason to believe is important. Curious to learn more, the club splits up to talk to everyone, with Reycho getting the privilege of teaming up with Nyoro. I would make further jokes, but you know, they're all 12! All they get is more BS about Mike and something about a lemonade drink that becomes a recurring joke that is never funny, and when they reunite, they're split again. Kansai, Chuko, Vanilla, Pai, Mochan, and Tatsun want to stay longer, while Nyoro, Aniki, Pochi, Yuki, and Jenny want to, understandably, get the fuck away from them. Do I leave and give up half my friends to a psycho cult?
Fuck it.
Is nothing I hate more than the phrase give up.
Oh, sorry, Nyoro, I didn't know your last name was Cena. Nyoro's hustle and loyalty is respected by the others, and they split into 2 teams to find proof that the cult is not as altruistic as they seem. Luckily, there's a guillotine just hanging around, and some cult members to politely expose the fate awaiting the lesser half of the GGC. They return to them to share this revelation, but they are too enthralled to care.
Shiver with excitement!
So they go underground to find some mushrooms to cook for them to undo the brainwashing, and Jesus Christ, I'm bored! I am this close to giving up on this game.
There's no phrase I hate more. I will never give up. No matter what happens. Never. Never!
Oh, sorry, Nyoro, I forgot that was your trigger word. Nyoro has awakened to the Inventor skill with her patent-pending Nyoro Bomb, or for short, we can call it the N-Bomb.
Is that called the N-Bomb?
Oh, yeah, on second thought, maybe not. Yuki, any better ideas?
We can call it the F-bomb.
Sold. Reycho and Nyoro make a dynamite pairing and help save the other members of the club. Then they steal a comically large bike that just so happens to have the exact amount of seats for everyone, and they fucking sing!
Boys and girls, go, go, go getters. Fate brought us together.
There's still like 10 hours of this to go, and it doesn't get any better.
Life sucks, and then you die.
Anyway, we can fast forward to the death part? No? Fuck. They arrive in Kobe, like the beef, not the Bryant, which apparently translates to God's door. This unlocks Nyoro's memory of her scientist father giving her a note with the numbers needed to open God's door. Did you know Nyoro is the daughter of a scientist? You didn't? Well, don't worry, this game really wants you to know Nyoro's dad is a scientist, so she'll mention it almost every time she talks. She gives Pochi the code that says XXY.
There's no numbers!
Well, actually, it connects to a piece of paper they obtained earlier that says X equals 12, but there's more to it that we'll get into later. That night, we see that Vanilla is a ghost! We get confirmation that no one aside from Pochi, Reycho, and Pai can see and hear Vanilla in a pretty good scene, even if that twist is really easy to catch on to. It's also really hard to believe that whenever Vanilla chimed in, everyone just so happened to stay quiet for just the right amount of time. I would have liked this a lot more if she got interrupted a lot when she talked. And the whole ghost thing isn't a lie either. She died a year before that bus ride from the beginning. And it's not a coincidence that the only people who saw Vanilla are the same people who can see the flying X. This brings us to the next fork in the road, as half the club wants to go to Kyoto, where another group of survivors are supposedly located, while the other half want to go to Osaka, where Vanilla kept saying she wanted to go. Again, doesn't matter in the long run, so we're on the road to Osaka, though this time they agreed that they shouldn't split up again, so at least there's that. Turns out there's absolutely nothing in Osaka, and Kansai kicks Chuko out of the club for questioning his leadership, so she fucking dies. Well, truthfully, she was bitten by a rat and probably has at least 3 diseases now, so they split up to find some antibiotics.
Long time no see, Breeze. It's me, Yellow Pea.
Oh, I kind of forgot you were in this game. You're looking good. Did you have some work done?
Oh, this is disgusting. What is that? Is that rancid? Is that tap-dancing crab demon? Is that nightmare? Is that true nightmare?
The Decapod captures Neuro and Reycho, leaving it to Kansai to awaken to the Slugger ability, which is basically just a strong baseball bat. You know, the whole team of people slowly awakening to different superpowers to represent their growth as people thing doesn't work when the powers suck! This is the next boss fight, and it's also just terrible. All Kansai has to do is hit the enemies and fireballs with his bat, and as long as you have a rudimentary understanding of how angles work, you won't struggle with this at all. They cure Chuko of her rat problem after curing Osaka of its crab problem, and Kansai hands his leader badge over to Reycho, our new glorious leader of the Go-Getters Club. And then we get to see the fate that befell Vanilla. They were having a cookout and she wanted marshmallows, so the little go-getter went to go get some and got hit by a truck.
Holy shit, you fucking killed her, dude!
And do you remember what Vanilla's task was at the beginning of this game? Do you know who the mastermind is yet? Trust me, it's probably less complicated than you think.
It was
Told you. Vanilla wanted them to participate in the game to undo their brainwashing that, as I said earlier, we find out didn't ever exist. So it's not complicated, just stupid. Then we cut to them walking on some train tracks talking about their crushes, and I hope they'll stand by me as I find some train tracks with an oncoming train to stand in front of. I don't care that Chuko likes Kansai, or that Pai and Aniki like each other, or that Mochan thinks he has a chance with Neuro, or that Tatsun is a fucking simp who wants to marry a TV character. The only one worth mentioning is Neuro liking Pochi because it's the only one that'll be important later.
Oh my god, I am so bored! Ah!
Hey, did you know that Neuro's dad is a scientist? Oh, thank God. Vanilla explains that the Go-Getters were taken on a helicopter shortly after the meteor crash that took them to World's End Land. And no, I'm not going to think about the logic of a helicopter landing in an underwater theme park. Vanilla found files detailing the brainwashing process and that it would be undone when put in a life-threatening situation. Well, I don't see how that could be a problem in the apocalypse. I keep getting distracted from this explanation because it's all so stupid. So Vanilla found the PLP puppet from the set of a movie they watched and copied that movie's premise to create the Game of Fate, but the PLP they faced in Osaka was a different one tampered with by Mike, that cult's god from earlier. But Mike isn't a god, it's an AI. What, you didn't see that coming? It's right in the name. Anyway, Mike was built by a genius scientist. If only we knew someone in this club who was related to a scientist, and went rogue as it began stealing people's emotions. However, through the sheer power of friendship or whatever the Go-Getters never lost their emotions, and no, I'm not making that up. That's why they were captured. Speaking of captured, they find a train and Pochi manages to get it moving, but Penelope arrives shortly afterward and takes Reycho and Chuko hostage, leading to the worst awakening in the game as Tatsun transforms into Electro Ranger Black. The power itself isn't bad and the suit is fine, but it turns Tatsun from a whiny Reddit user into an intolerable self-relating dick waffle Twitter user that unironically responds to posts with ratio plus you fell off as if his base personality wasn't intolerable as it was. This leads to another painfully easy boss fight, though this one is a lot more annoying since you have to dodge through a mind-numbingly easy pattern at least 4 times. Ro PLP isn't done yet, and this time Aniki stays back to stop it after hearing Vanilla's voice, leading to the next branching path. Or not. Reycho, Kansai, Pai, and Yoro jump to the other car, and the Dynamite duo reunites to throw an F-bomb at the rail switch, separating the train cars and the Go-Getters in the process, which isn't a problem until their half of the train crashes and they have to progress forward on foot. They camp for the night and get an SOS message that some robots have captured their other half and brought them to a factory in Nagoya because why not? Luckily, Vanilla has Ghosty Girl powers and accompanied them to the factory, so she can lead them to the others. They arrive at the factory and free everybody, then come across a screen in a control room room that shows Vanilla in some sort of tube, and the return of the Master from earlier, who shows off Mike's core. He also reveals that Vanilla never died, she was just comatose. So Reycho, Pochi, and Pi haven't been seeing her ghost. There's another explanation later that you may be able to guess. An intruder alert puts an end to their investigation, and they escape to the rooftop, where the next boss fight is awaiting. Well, it's not really a fight, you just dodge it until Nyoro completes her massive F-bomb. They escape on a helicopter that Pochi just knows how to operate, Mount Fuji erupts, Tokyo is completely gone, and the helicopter gets hit by a meteor. Roll the credits! And now we can go back to the timeline. See what I meant about the decisions you make at those points not mattering in the long run? You have to go back and do the others regardless, so let's YouTube rewind back to Kagoshima and choose to go to Oita instead. The only highlights of their time in Oita is Pi getting captured by a giant rolling beetle thing, and also finding a phone that reveals that they aren't in 1995 like they were when they were in the bust. They're in the futuristic year of 1996! Now we return to Ehime and choose to stay with the Mike cult. They get hypnotized and wake up in a cargo ship on its way to Shindo Island. The other club members manage to sneak onto the ship using Nyoro's shrink ray, sure, and they're all about to be blasted by the Master's laser shotgun, causing Pi to awaken to the closed sphere ability. Now, some of you may be wondering if the awakenings in the other timeline didn't happen now. For example, in choosing to leave the cult, we got Nyoro Sina's awakening, but by choosing to stay, we got Pi's. And they do actually carry over, as you need all of them in the finale. Reycho picks a piece of paper off the Master that clearly says heaven, though Pi reads it as N3AV3H. Hey, Pi, I have a group of 15 high schoolers I'd like to introduce you to. You can bond over your inability to fucking read upside down! Anyway, this brings us to the fight against Penelope's best form, a crude children's crayon drawing of a pirate. The fight itself isn't as bad as the others, but it's still not great. You just reflect shipping containers as Pi and then throw boxes with Reycho. Also, I think it's cute that Pi's awakening logo is the symbol for Pi as opposed to her first initial like it is for everyone else. Pi's reward for her heroics is being fucking pistol whipped in the back of the head, and they all jump off the ship to escape the Master. Now we fast forward to the Osaka-Kyoto choice and go to Kyoto instead. They find a society of people living underground who have had their emotions removed by Mike and his monitor drones, as revealed by Kansai's mentor and the former lover of Genu's dead sister. He also says that the X-shaped thing in the sky is called the Panopticon, and that Mike removed people's emotions to stop them from committing crimes and killing each other, since all those actions are driven by emotion. He then almost dies when the Earth opens to swallow his ass, pause, but he's saved by Genu as she awakens to her power, Gravity Flip. Basically, she can walk on ceilings. Also, since he was in a life-threatening situation, the dude gets his emotions back. He meets up with them outside and tells them about the Otherworlder and X-types. The Otherworlder is, as it sounds, a being from another world and is trying to defeat Mike, and the only way it can do that is by sending and receiving messages with a special type of people called X-types, marked with an X on their forehead. And now we ride back to the decision on the train, and we can finally choose to stop the train. The plan fails, leaving Aniki to awaken to his power, Micro Quaker, which crashes the train. Aniki shares a story about how Vanilla would always cut his hair and help him with many other things, and Yuki says another type of magic mushroom might help them all see Vanilla, because of course! The game turns into an Uncharted anime as Aniki, Pi, and third-wheeling Reycho retrieve the mushroom, which does actually allow everyone to see Vanilla in a pretty sweet scene. But it's not as good as the scene where Aniki first sees Vanilla, which is by far the best moment in the game.
I can't touch you. Even though you're this close.
It almost makes the last 10 to 12 hours worth it. Just kidding, no it doesn't. Especially since it's immediately ruined by another fucking song! As they near Tokyo, they all realize that Pochi is the only one without a superpower aside from Yuki, and has really done jack shit this whole time while Reycho has been saving them at every turn. This is enforced almost immediately when Reycho stops a blimp that's attacking them, and then uses said blimp to destroy a bigger blimp. He tries to catch the bigger blimp and suffers some, damages in the process.
A robot? He's a robot?
One that was controlling Reycho. It was Pochi.
Psych! You've really been playing as Pochi this whole time. Did you pick up on my hints? Feeling betrayed, they all leave Pochi behind and continue their trek to Tokyo. It's not until they get there that Vanilla realizes that was a dumbass decision, since Pochi was, by extension, the one bailing their ass out every time. And she does it again by saving Nyoro from being shot before distracting Mike's robot army while talking about how he was sent into the Go-Getters Club by Mike to monitor them, but turned against him. Oh, also, he's a robot too, and an X-type. The robots capture Pochi and bring him to the Go-Getters' old school, where they bust in to break him out. This section is incredibly annoying because of that fucking bitch around Pochi's neck that messes with the controls. They eventually make it to the roof to escape, where they're interrupted by Mike in its first appearance, with like an hour or two left in the game. It repeats typical villain shtick about being a god, humans being creatures that want to be controlled, the arms race dooming us all. Been there, done that. It also reveals that the Go-Getters were brought together specifically because they were the only people in the world not losing their emotions, and it was because of how selfless they were. And this whole adventure was set up by Mike to awaken their dormant powers so that they can become the shepherds to the emotionless sheep of humanity. The brainwashing Vanilla thought they went through underwater, which I said was a lie from the beginning, was actually Mike surgically removing their cerebral limiters to unlock their powers, and I really couldn't fucking care less. This story lost me about 5 to 8 hours ago. Oh, also, Mike was created by neuroscientist father, because of course it was! Mike wants them to either become humanity's shepherds or exterminate humanity, but they decide to go with option 3 and plan to destroy Mike. Nyoro then bestows the leader badge onto Pochi, along with something else. I told you it was the only important one. They make it out to the Panopticon, where the cold open took place, and face off once more against Penelope, in the most annoying fight in the game, though I do like the concept. Each club member will face Penelope one-on-one, and after their turn is up, Penelope will adopt that person's power, and it flows well. They defeat Penelope and discover that Mike isn't in the Panopticon as they were led to believe. They interrogate what's left of Penelope, who tells them that Vanilla was the first of the Go-Getters to awaken, and that her power is ethereal spirit. So they haven't been seeing her ghost, but her spirit separate from her living body. Now, if you've been paying attention, you'll remember that the powers only awaken when performing a selfless act, and getting hit by a truck isn't exactly that. Well, that's when Penelope comes in once again to reveal that the truck was on course to hit all of them, so Vanilla took one for the team so the rest could live. In order to find Vanilla and Mike's mainframe, Pochi works with the Otherworlder and combines the clues they gathered from the different timelines, like Vanilla being kept somewhere named Heaven, and since Mike was built by Nyoro's father and calls itself a god, the god's door code is connected to it. And XXY is actually X times Y, X being 12 from that paper earlier, and Y standing for year, which was revealed to be 1996 on the phone Pi found. So the code to access Heaven, where Vanilla and Mike are, is 12 times 1996, or 23952. Finally, overlaying the N3A V3H paper with a map shows that Heaven is located in World's End Land, where this whole story began. But before they get there, we learn a little bit more about this Otherworlder. It reached out to Pochi right before the bus ride and was the one really controlling Reycho the whole time, as Pochi just did exactly what it told him to. It also took control of the other members of the Go-Getters Club throughout the trip in sporadic instances when they were in danger, and if they ever died on their trip, it would go back to right before it happened and try again. Have you figured out who the Otherworlder is yet? They return to the underwater theme park that, last I knew, flooded, and find Heaven and Vanilla. They have a touching reunion that is interrupted by the Master, who gives us more Mike's position. Mike has two sub-personalities along with its main one. One was Penelope, and the other is Yuki. You know, that girl who fell out of nowhere and has contributed nothing since. Oh, also, he brings out some security. He's been fixed up and is working on behalf of Mike. They managed to break the control and help him gain sentience to the power of song.
Everyone is just so nice until they drive you to kill yourself.
With Reycho killing himself to expose Mike's core, they upload Pochi into Mike's mainframe to erase it and keep Yuki's personality alive. But Mike puts up a firewall, so the club splits into 3 to retrieve keys to destroy the wall. And now it's time for the final boss fight against Mike.
Hey, can you hear me? You can see me, right?
Did you figure it out before? The player themselves is the Otherworlder, which is a fantastic twist, and aside from the controls generally making this gameplay feel bad, this boss fight is actually pretty fun, especially in comparison to the others. Pochi defeats Mike, restoring everyone's emotions and saving Yuki, and then Reycho is alive and his own person now, so the Go-Getters are complete as the credits roll for real this time. Out of every game I've covered on this channel, which at this point is admittedly not that much, this is the one I remember the least about. It's just so unremarkable in almost every aspect. The gameplay is unpolished and bland, like 80% of the main characters suck, the plot is pretty generic and gets way too smart for its own good, and the game wastes so much time that I feel like this would have worked better as a limited series anime or a movie. I also think it would have been much more believable if the characters weren't 12, but maybe that's just me. Pochi, Reycho, Nyoro, Pai, and Vanilla were my favorites amongst the cast, with all the others ranging from average to just plain terrible. I liked the plot twist with Reycho being a robot, though I don't think they needed to make Pochi and Yuki robots too. They could have just left Pochi as a regular kid who happened to be an X-type. Speaking of X-types, I loved the twist that the Otherworlder trying to destroy Mike is actually the player themselves. It's not often that games make the player their own character like that. I just wish the rest of the story was of that quality. This creative team has the occasional tendency to tease a much more interesting concept before switching to something much tamer and worse, which is perfectly exemplified in this game's opening. It's far superior to the rest of the game and could have been extended into the full game with a very similar story. The opening actively works against the rest of the game because the quality disparity is so massive. The final score for World's End Club is a 4 out of 10. A couple strong characters and moments with a very solid opening aren't enough to save what feels like an unfinished mobile game that doesn't hold a candle to the series its creative team are known for. If you're watching this when it came out, then February is right around the corner. And if you're watching this the day of, then the Royal Rumble is tomorrow. Or if you're watching this in the future, then it already happened. Did Bailey win the Women's Royal Rumble? I hope so. I love Bailey. Speaking of love, but in a different way, that's what February's all about. And what's more lovely than a romantic poem? But if I'm gonna write one of those, I think I'm gonna need a little help. I hope to see you there.